going to be talking about something very interesting, which is the important clauses in your tenancy agreement. So let's start with saying that we're all not new to tenancy and tenancy agreement, because one way or the other you are either a tenant or a landlord. You are once a tenant and now a landlord, respective. It means that everyone is aware of what tenancy entails and who a tenant and who a landlord is. And so that means we are also familiar with the phrase tenancy agreement. So tenancy agreement is an agreement that binds the parties, which is the landlord and the tenant that are in a tenancy, and it states the terms and the obligations and basically all that is needed for the tenancy to run smoothly. So basically, tenancy agreement is an agreement that is either orally or written. It is either oral or written, but in most conditions, your tenancy agreement is usually written down. And I think that is the best type, a written agreement, because you are bound by it and you are able to refer to it in case of any dispute or just to refresh your memory. So basically, a tenancy agreement is so important that it could be regarded as the Bible in tenancy, because where there is an issue or where maybe you need to go back and you need to know, okay, what is binding me in this tenancy, what are things I can do and things I cannot do, or when does it end, or when does it start. You'll be able to refer to your tenancy agreement. So it's very important, and that is why it is also important that before you sign your tenancy agreement, you go through it and understand each and every clause, because once you sign this agreement, it's binding on you. Because even in the case of a dispute, the court will first refer to your tenancy agreement and see, okay, what does your tenancy agreement provide in case of this, before referring to any other thing. So with that being said, tenancy agreement is very, very important, and it binds you and your landlord, or you and your tenants in the tenancy. So now, with that being said, let's go into some of the clauses that are very important that you need to note in a tenancy agreement. Once you see a tenancy agreement and some of these clauses are not provided, you need to ask, why are they not here, or what are the provisions for these clauses that are not here. So now let's go into these clauses. So the first one is the name of the parties. Just like every other agreement or contract, the names of the parties to the agreement have to be expressly stated. You need to know the person that you are signing this agreement with. You need to know who you are into this agreement with. So it has to be expressly stated. That is your landlord and you. It can't be it can't be an agent of the landlord, no, because it is the landlord that you have a business with directly. So you need to have the landlord's name there and the tenant's name there in your tenancy agreement, because these are the parties in the agreement. These are the persons that are in the tenancy business. These are the persons that are being bound by this agreement, because it is the names of people that are on the agreement, obviously, that are bound by the agreement. So your name should be stated in the agreement. The next thing is the description of the property, because it is the subject matter of the agreement. You need to state it. The property has to be described there. If it's a 2-bedroom apartment at so street at number this, that, it has to be expressly stated there for the parties, because where there is disputes in maybe the land, this is not the building I paid for, this is not the apartment that I planned on renting. You have to go, you go back to your tenancy agreement and see there, because it is going to be there for you to say that, okay, it was the 4-bedroom apartment at number so that I paid for. That is that is what will bind you. So it has to be there you have the description of the apartment, which entails the address, the location, and so on. So the next one is the duration of the tenancy. We need to have the commencement date. What date does it start? What date does it expire? And if it's a yearly tenancy or it is a fixed term tenancy. Fixed term are tenancies that are fixed for a particular period. That is, it can be renewed. So you need to know, or is it a 6 months tenancy, is it weekly? So that also has to be stated in your tenancy agreement, the duration and the commencement date, knowing when the tenancy starts and when the tenancy would expire. So if you don't have that, if you have given a tenancy agreement and that clause is not there, you need to ask for that, because it is very important. It is what tells you when you can move in and when you are expected to move out of the apartment that you intend to rent. And another clause is the rent clause. That is the amount that you'll be paying for the tenancy. It has to be stated there if it's 200,000, if it's 100,000, and even if there is a caution fee as well, it should also be stated in your tenancy agreement, because this is what you are buying, this is what you're expected to pay. You cannot, because you can't agree with the landlord that, okay, I'm going to pay 200,000 for this apartment, and you see your tenancy agreement and you see 300,000 and you sign it. You have made yourself bound by that. That means you have to pay the amount, which is 300,000. So that's, like I said earlier, this is why you have to go through your tenancy agreement before you sign it, to ensure that the things that you might have agreed with your landlord are what is stated there, or if not, you let the landlord know that this is not what we agreed for, and I'm not going to sign it. So basically, like I said, the rent clause has to be there. The amount that you're paying for the rent should be there. Then exclusive possession. In your tenancy, as the tenant, you have a right to exclusive possession, and that is, you have a right to the entire apartment, to enjoy peace and quiet possession of that property for that period of time. So it has to be stated there that you're entitled to that. And if it's not stated there, you should raise it with your landlord and say, excuse me, why is this not here? I believe that once I make payment and for this sole period, I have exclusive possession of the property. Because yes, the landlord is the owner of that property, but once you make payments and once you sign the agreement and everything is done, you have possessive rights are passed on to you. So you have exclusive possession and you have the right to enjoy peace, to quiet and peaceable enjoyment of the property for that period. So it has to be in your agreement, it has to be stated there. Then another clause is the rent review. So there are situations where there has to be an increase in the rent, or there could possibly be a decrease, which hardly happens. But it should also be stated in your rent that the period of this rent is subject to review after a particular period of years, or after, it has to be stated there. But then the agreement, it depends on the agreement you have with your landlord on the frequency of the review of the rent, but it must be stated there if it is subject to review and the frequency of that review. And another thing is rent renewal. You have to have a rent renewal clause in your tenancy agreement, which is whether you have the right to renew. If this tenancy is subject to renewal, can you, after the commencement and after the expiration of that tenancy, can you renew the tenancy? Can you remain on the property by paying the rent for the next year? So this has to be stated there. But there are some there are some circumstances where this is not stated, and that is if the agreement between you and the landlord is that this tenancy is for a fixed term. You don't intend to renew, and you are not going to renew. So where you have made that agreement with your landlord, then you don't necessarily need a rent renewal clause. And the next one is inspection clause. So like I said earlier, you have exclusive possession to that property, and for that period of time you have the right to let to decide on who can come in and out of that property. But like I also said, the landlord still has ownership of that property. So in the tenancy agreement, you could have a clause which allows the landlord have access upon prior notice. Prior notice has to be given to you because you are in possession at that moment. So he has to give prior notice to you, and you have to accept the notice. You have to accept his request because he has a right to actually inspect the property to know if there is any repairs that are needed, if there have been any if there have been any adjustments or anything. Basically, he has a right to inspect, and you have a right to prior notice. That notice could be a 24 hours notice, a 48 hours notice, just a notice to let you know that, okay, as the landlord, I'll be coming in. So that's another clause that you should look out for in your tenancy agreement. If you have a tenancy agreement that says that, okay, the landlord will inspect from time to time, you can tell, and it doesn't state that he would give prior notice, you should tell the landlord to include that, or tell the lawyer of the landlord to include that, to let you have prior notice. And you can also determine if you want a 24 hours notice or 48-hour notice. And so another clause is forfeiture and re-entry. Like I said, the landlord still has ownership even though you are in possession of that land, of that property. And where there might be a breach in the terms that you have agreed upon in the tenancy agreement, the landlord also has a right to terminate the tenancy and take a court order to re-enter into the property. So that's why there's a clause that usually provides for that. So you know that if you breach any of these terms, any of these agreements, the landlord has a right to terminate the tenancy even before the expiration date, and has a right to re-enter and take possession. But note that he has to go through the court to do this. And another clause that we should also look out for are notices, because like if the landlord intends to inspect, he has to give notice. If the landlord wants to terminate the tenancy, he has to give notice, and the law provides for this in the Lagos State tenancy laws, that there are, depending on the type of tenancy that you have a particular period of notice. Could be for a yearly tenant, it's 6 months for a 6-month tenancy, and fixed like that. So it has to be stated there that if the landlord desires to terminate this tenancy, the notice, he has to give a notice of so amount of days, or so amount of days. And also the notice clause should also include what would be considered to be a proper notice. Could it be a text? Could it be an email? Could it be a letter that you receive and also acknowledge that letter? It could be anything, subject to what agreements you and the landlord have. So this should also be provided for in your tenancy agreement. So other clauses to include obligations. This is what it should state: the obligations the landlord has, the obligations which the tenant has towards the landlord. It could be who insures the property, or who makes repairs, or who pays for electricity bills, rates, and other necessary charges. So this should also be included in your tenancy agreement so as to guide you on what obligations you know that you have to fulfill, and obligations that you expect your landlord to also fulfill. And then there should be a covenant, for a clause for delivering possession of the property at the end of the expiration. This is usually to protect the landlord's right of ownership, reversionary ownership, meaning that once the tenancy ends and you are not renewing, or you don't intend to renew or stay, the landlord has a right for you to deliver the property back to the landlord, to deliver possession of the property back to the landlord. And it's usually stated in your tenancy agreement. Some tenancy agreements, it could be stated that you deliver the keys of the apartment to the landlord directly, or it could be you deliver it to an agent authorized by the landlord. So basically this is a clause you should also look out for. And then you also have the execution part, which is where you sign. This is very important because this is where really binds you to that contract once you sign this. So that's another part that you should also take note of. And there are lots of clauses actually in a tenancy agreement. You cannot exhaust them because it depends really on the circumstances and the agreements between you and your landlord. But those that I've mentioned today are basically one of the most important clauses that you should always look out for when entering into a tenancy agreement with your landlord. And you should also take note that before signing it, like I said, you make sure you read through the agreement because it binds you. If you sign it without going through it, you cannot later come and raise the defense that you didn't read it, you didn't know, you weren't aware of this. No. So you have to read through it and raise questions, ask questions where you feel that you do not understand what a clause is saying in particular, or where you feel like this clause could be detrimental on your part, or this clause seems ambiguous, or just where you feel you're not comfortable with a clause. You can also raise it up with your landlord, and you can arrange for it to be recouched in a particular way that is more suitable for both you and your landlord. And you should also ask for a copy of the tenancy agreement once you sign it, because you need to have a copy of something that binds you and another person. You need to have it in your custody as well to also rely on when necessary. So basically these are the necessary clauses and important clauses that you should take note of in your tenancy agreement. And where you do not understand some of these clauses, you can reach out to a lawyer, you can reach out to the landlord, or anyone that you believe has a better understanding of the tenancy agreement. I hope we're all able to learn something today. If you have any questions, please leave it down in the comment section, and see you next week same time. Thank you.